Okay? Everyone has seen Lab 9 and 10 already, and we've already been using some functions in this class. Now, I'm going to use a math one that we've used before. It's basically a way to make your code more compact, and oftentimes you'll make your own commands that you want to use later on, and they'll just be like a few lines of code. And let's say you have to use the same lines of code. You have 5 lines of code, and they're going to come up in your code like 25 times. Now, do you want to just copy and paste those 5 lines of code? Or would it be better to just code it once, kind of up here or in a separate file, and then you could reuse it anytime you want? One of those functions that we've used already is square root. Okay. We actually don't know what happens inside this square root. I think we could probably look inside. There it is, right there. Oops. I don't really even know how this computer figures out square root, but it does, and there it is inside the library. So that is a function there, and this should, basically every function will always have a name, okay? In this case, it's called sqrt. Uh-oh. Am I frozen? No. Well, let me try running it again. There you go. Wrote the number 4. Okay? Guys, can you sit down and be quiet? What are you doing? Okay? I'm doing something here. Okay, so every function should have a name. Every function should have brackets where it takes some sort of value in. It could be a string, it could be a float, it could be an integer, it doesn't matter. And then every function also has a type. Now this is a float. Square root always returns a float. Its name is sqrt, and the input that it takes is a float as well. So let's make our own function. Let's make something that takes in a number. First of all, let's make something that prints out a number, and it prints it out, and it divides it by, or let's think of something really easy. In the lab, we had one that takes in an integer and prints out 10 times that integer. Okay. So I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it int 10, like that. It's got to take in an integer. Now I could give this variable any name I want. So I'm just going to call it input. And then what it's going to do, this code is really simple. They all have return statements in them too. It's going to take whatever you pass in the brackets and times it by 10. Times by 10. Now the only thing I'm missing here is the function. It's like a variable. It needs its own type. So I'm going to write int here as well, because I know it's going to print out an integer. Okay? So I could go 16 times 10 like that, and it would print out 160. Okay? Or I could call my lame function that I made, called int 10. It will tell me that it's an integer. It's basically going to change whatever I put into the brackets into a number. So it's going to tell me that int 10 is actually an integer. And if I do a bracket here, it will tell me what it's looking for. It's looking for an integer. I don't have to call it input. I could put a variable in here that represents an integer. I could put a straight up integer in there, no problem. That will also print 160. So it's basically like giving my block of code a name. Okay? Let's look at a different example here. I'm going to make a function called add up. I want it to add all integers. If I give it an integer, I want it to add up every integer underneath it as well, up to the number 1. So I'm just going to call it like this again. But this is going to need some more code, okay? Inside of here, I'm going to have to make some sort of total variable. It's going to have to start at 0, okay? And then from there, I'm going to do a for loop to count up. So I'm going to write int I equals 0. So it's going to start, actually I'll start at 1. And then I want it to go all the way up to and including the number they put in. And then I want to make my for loop go up by 1. And in here, I'm going to make total equal total plus I. So this program should, if I type in 20, it should print out 20 plus 19 plus 18 plus 17 plus all the way up to, all the way down to 1. Okay? So what I have to do, the last line I'm missing in here is return total. I need to have a return command. If my function has a type, if it's going to print out a number or a letter or a character or a float, it has to have this return in there. So I could have just wrote this code like this in my actual main and used it. But the nice thing about functions is now anytime I want to add up a bunch of numbers, I just call this command, add up. And I could say 20 and it should print out what they all add up together to be. 210 apparently. I'll have to take its word for it. What about 1,000? 500,500. I think that's right. Okay, so that's kind of a neat way to make your code more compact. I could even go farther and put this in a separate file, for instance. Okay? And then I would never have to look at it, and every time I wanted to add up numbers, I would just call my little command that I made called add up. So that's the first type of function, and then there's one other type of function called void. Let's say you want to run a whole bunch of lines of code, but you don't need to return some value. Then you would just call void. Okay? So we'll talk about that maybe a little later, but work on finishing labs 9 and 10, guys, this week. Tomorrow is Friday, so I don't know what we'll do tomorrow. I might sign the assignment so that we can get working on that as well.